Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah here. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel Amir Hashem. Today we will be learning Daf Kuf Nun Tes Amud Aleph. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Shabbos. We pick up today on near the bottom of Kuf Nun Ches Amud Beis, 2 lines off the bottom in the Shulchan Aruch with the words of the Ramah Hagah, and that is in Siman Shin Chaf Hey in the middle of Sif Ches. Our learning today should be a schus for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael and Asuna Batzara Bashivya. Ha'imdim bein bayamu bein bayabasha hamakim yirachem aleihem v'yitziam yitzar l'rvacha me'afelu la'ira mishibud l'gu'ula hashta bagala v'zman kariv v'naymar amen. Our learning should be a schus refuah shalema for Yeshua Levi ben Ahuva Malka Chana, Yitzchak ben Sian ben Dusha, Rivka b'Ashir Aleach, Chava Adasa b'Serel. They should all have a refuah shalema b'Sar Shar Chayla Yisrael, and the schus of the limud HaTorah of Klal Yisrael. The Rabbeinu Shalom should protect Gans Klal Yisrael b'chol makom shehem. So we're in the middle of a little bit of a deceptively complex sugya here, and we're discussing what happens when an Eina Yehudi does malacha on Shabbos, and he does it for himself, or if he does it for Yisrael. What is the halacha regarding the product of the malacha that he did? When is it aser? When is it mutter? Who is it aser to? Who is it mutter to? Etc., etc. So let's give a quick little recap of what we've learned here in the beginning of Sif Ches. So in Sif Ches, the Mechaber is discussing a case where an Eina Yehudi brought something from outside of the Tchum. But here in Sif Ches, there's one factor of this discussion that we're going to X out, that we're not going to be concerned with, and that is, we're not going to be concerned with the issue of muktzah, because now we're going to be speaking about something that is not muktzah. So we're not talking about something where the Eina Yehudi might have trapped a fish. When we said that if an Eina Yehudi traps a fish on Shabbos, we have a new issue. That fish was muktzah during the Ben Hashmashas period on Friday evening, and therefore migudis katzayla Ben Hashmashas is katzayla kula yuma. So in the case of an Eina Yehudi, you trapped a fish, or in the case of an Eina Yehudi, you picked an apple off a tree on Shabbos. In those cases, first of all, the Eina Yehudi performed an Issa Daraisa. Picking an apple or off a tree or catching a fish is a malacha daraisa. And second of all, over there we need to be concerned with the issue of muktzah. Because now, whenever we're going to look at the fish that he caught or at the apple that he picked, besides the question of the fact that the Eina Yehudi did malacha on Shabbos, we have another issue, and that is the issue of muktzah. But here in Sif Ches, we're not going to have either one of those issues. We're not going to have an issue of an Issa Daraisa, because here in Sif Ches, the only Isser, the only malacha that the Eina Yehudi has done is that he has brought something from outside of the Tchum. And that is an Issa D'Rabbanan. Also, we're not dealing here right now with the question of muktzah. We're talking about something where muktzah is not negeya. So what's the issue that we have before us? The issue we have before us is that an Eina Yehudi performed the malacha. What malacha did he perform? He brought something from outside of the Tchum, so he did something which was an Issa D'Rabbanan, and now we want to know, can a Yid benefit from that item that the Eina Yehudi brought from outside of the Tchum or not? That's the question that we're dealing with here in Sif Ches. And what did the Mechaber say? Well, the Mechaber said it depends why he brought it. If he brought it for himself, la'atzmai, he brought it totally for his own purposes, well, in that case, this item is going to be mutter. It's going to be mutter to any Yisrael, and it's going to be mutter even on Shabbos itself. It's mutter b'tiltol, it's mutter ba'achila, it's completely mutter. Any Yehudi brought something from outside of the Tchum, but he didn't do that malacha for Yisrael, he did it for himself. So we're not going to aser the product of that malacha, and we're going to say that it's mutter for everybody. It's mutter b'tiltol because there's no tzad muktzah over here. There's no reason for it to be muktzah. It's mutter even ba'achila because you can have benefit from the fact that he brought it out from outside of the Tchum, since he did it completely for himself. But how about if he brought it b'shvil Yisrael? What if this Eina Yehudi brought this item from outside of the Tchum and he brought it for a Yid? He brought it for Yisrael. What's the halacha in that case? Well, in that case, the Mechaber said, let's break it down. Should we aser this item betiltel? No, we're not going to aser it betiltel because there's no reason for it to be muktzah. We're talking about an item that is not inherently muktzah. We're talking about something that was not muktzah during Ben Hashmashos. So there's no reason to say that this item is muktzah, and therefore this item is going to be mutter betiltel. You could move it. But it's going to be aser ba'achila for the person that he brought it for. So let's say this Eina Yehudi brought, he brought a pound of kosher salami from outside of the Tchum, and he brought it on Shabbos. Okay, salami is not muktzah. We don't have to worry that salami was picked from a tree on Shabbos, because salami is not picked from trees. So Tony, the Eina Yehudi, brought a pound of salami for Ruvain the Yisrael on Shabbos. It's 100% mutter betiltel. You could pick up the pound of salami and you could put it into the refrigerator. But Ruvain cannot eat the salami on Shabbos. Because if Ruvain was to eat that salami on Shabbos, he would be having hana from the fact that Tony, the Eina Yehudi, did Isser D'Rabbanan for him on Shabbos. So now it's Asim D'Rabbanan for Ruvain to have hana from that malacha, and Ruvain is not allowed to eat that salami. Not only is he not allowed to eat that salami on Shabbos, he's not allowed to eat that salami Motzei Shabbos after Shabbos from a Lava Malka until he waits for the amount of time of Kidei Sheyaseh. He has to wait for the amount of time that Tony would have been able to bring him the salami on Motzei Shabbos. So if he knows where Tony lives, and he knows where the store is, where Tony picked up the salami, and let's say he knows that for Tony to get the salami and deliver it to him would have taken an hour, so now he has to wait an hour on Motzei Shabbos before he could have hana from that salami. And that brings us out to the Ramah that we're up to here. And what the Ramah is dealing with is exactly how do we measure this time period of Kidei Sheyaseh. The way I told it to you right now is the way the Mechaber learns. The Mechaber says, if it would have taken Tony an hour to get the salami and bring you the salami, so then Motzei Shabbos you have to wait for an hour after the Zman. Now, what's the logic of that? The logic of it is very simple. We don't want Ruvain to get hana from the fact that Tony did malacha for him on Shabbos. So what we're going to do is, the malacha that Tony did, transporting the salami, took an hour. We're not going to let you have hana from that hour of malacha that Tony did on Shabbos. We're going to make you wait an hour on Motzei Shabbos. By the time that hour is passed on Motzei Shabbos, now I'm not having hana anymore from the fact that Tony brought it on Shabbos, because now he could have brought it on Motzei Shabbos. That's the Mechaber. The Ramah throws in a little bit of a wrinkle. Says the Ramah Hagah, 2 lines off the bottom, there are those that say, De'ein halayla oila min hacheshbon, that the night time does not count. When you count that Kidei Sheyaseh, you can't say, I'm going to wait an hour at night for Kidei Sheyaseh. Rak tzarech lahamtin b'yom rishon b'Kidei Sheyaseh. The Ramah says there are those that hold that it's not enough to wait an hour on Motzei Shabbos. You have to wait until Sunday during the day, and you have to wait an hour on Sunday during the day. Let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah to see why. It says the Mishnah Berurah, Mem Yesh Oimrim, Lefi she'ein regilus lahavi balayla mimakam rachik. The rationale of this is, again, the whole purpose we're waiting for Kidei Sheyasu is so that theoretically the Eina Yehudi could have done it on Motzei Shabbos. But, especially back in the day, people didn't take long trips at night. So what are you saying? I'm waiting Motzei Shabbos Kidei Sheyasu, so I'm not having hana from the fact that he did it on Shabbos. Yes, you are. It's baloney. Because you're waiting an hour on Motzi Shabbos, but Tony wouldn't transport it on Motzi Shabbos. So when you eat it an hour after the Zman on Motzi Shabbos, you're still getting hana from the fact that he brought it on Shabbos. Very nice he waited for an hour. But Tony wouldn't bring it on Motzi Shabbos because he wouldn't travel for an hour on Motzi Shabbos. If you want to wait Kadeshi Yasu, you have to wait to Sunday during the day, and you have to wait for an hour on Sunday during the day. V'imkein, since it's not typical for people to travel distance at night, imkein akati nena hayisrael b'masha avyoy b'yoyim. So if you eat it at night, you're still having enough from the fact that the Eni Yehudi did the malacha on Shabbos. V'alkein, therefore, tzarich lahamtin shi'er hahava l'machar b'yoyim. You have to wait for that transportation time on Sunday during the day. But this is only true when it was brought from a distance to chutz l'tchum svir lehukein. Because back in the day, people didn't travel a significant distance at night. Earlier on in the Siman, when we were talking about an Eni Yehudi who brought something on Shabbos, but over there the issue was not that he brought it from outside of the Tchum. Over there the issue we were dealing with was the issue of Muktzah, where he picked the apples or he caught the fish on Shabbos. We didn't bring up this issue over there, because over there it wasn't coming from outside of the Tchum, and therefore we didn't have this logic that they wouldn't travel a great distance during the night. The Kosav of Magen Avram, the Magen Avram writes, the Magen Avram paskins like the Mechaber, not like this Ramah that's being more machmer. And the Mishnah Berurah says it makes sense that we shouldn't be machmer like this Ramah. Because we're going to see very shortly a Yesh Oimrim that holds that this item that the Eni Yehudi brought is never asur on Motzi Shabbos at all. And you don't even have to wait for B'kidei Sheyasu. Certainly if you want to use the item that the Eni Yehudi brought for guests, to serve to guests, or for any other Dvar Mitzvah, you could be mekel. But if we're dealing in a case where the Eni Yehudi did an Issa Daraisa, Shaliket Memechuber Chutz L'Tchum, where we have to worry that the Eni Yehudi performed Malacha Daraisa, he did Toilish, and then he brought it from outside the Chum, Yesh L'Hachmer. Mikamakim L'Dvar Mitzvah, Yesh L'Hacha B'chal Gafti. Okay, so far we have covered over here what the halacha is. If the Eni Yehudi brought something from outside of the Tchum on Shabbos, we've discussed what the halacha is. If he brought it for Yisrael, what is the halacha in the context of that Yisrael? It's mutter b'tiltel, but it's asur ba'achila for who? For the Yid that the Eni Yehudi brought it for. And it's asur on Motzi Shabbos until Kidei Sheyasu. Now we have a Yesh Oimrim. Says the Yesh Oimrim, the end of the bottom line of the Mechaber, the Yesh Oimrim, there is another opinion that says, the Lemisha Huva Bishviloi, that even for the one that it was brought for, mutter la'erev miyad. This more makel opinion holds that even Ruvain, who Tony brought the item for, even for him it becomes mutter Motzei Shabbos miyad. You don't have to wait for Kidei Sheyasu. Says the Mishnah Berurah cut Mem Aleph on the bottom of Kuf the Chesam Beis. The la'acherim mutter. Why the betkumin derabanan like asur la'acherim rak lemi shehuvu bishvilai. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped. Let's go back to the bottom line of Kuf the Chesam Beis. I skipped something very important. Like I said, we've discussed so far what the halacha is for the Yisrael that the item was brought for. But now, says the Mechaber, middle of the line, the bottom line, right by the Ois Katan Mem Aleph of the Mishnah Berurah, the la'acherim mutter boy b'yoyim. This item that the Eni Yehudi brought is asur ba'achila for the Yisrael that it was brought for. But v'la'acherim mutter boy b'yoyim. But for every other Yisrael, this item is 100% mutter, even on Shabbos itself. It's only asur for the one that the Eni Yehudi brought it for. Says the Mishnah Berurah Mem Aleph. Why is that? Mutter, because remember, what are we discussing here? The only isser that we're discussing over here is the fact that the Eni Yehudi brought it from outside the Tchum, and Tchumin is an isser derabanan. This is going to be something very important to remember. Says the Chavetz Chaim, when we're dealing with the isser Tchumin, which is only an isser derabanan, Over there, we only aser the product of the malacha that the Ein Yehudi did to the Yisrael that it was done for. We don't aser it to other Yisraelim. V'chein b'sha'ar isurei d'Rabbanan k'delekamei b'sif yud. And we're going to see that halacha also pertains to any other time the Ein Yehudi did on Isur d'Rabbanan. V'emhevi kam derech rishos harabim ayin l'kamon sif katan sif tesavav sif katan ayin hey. Even when we're talking about the tchum of 12 mil, 24,000 amas, where there are some that hold that that's an Isser Daraisa, since it's not an Isser that is spelled out clearly in a pasuk, the Magen Avram says we are not machmer. Okay, so again, the Ein Yehudi brought something from outside of the tchum. The Isser tchum is an Isser Darabanan. If he brought it for himself, it's mutter to everybody. If he brought it for Yisrael, then to that Yisrael, it is asur ba'achila on Shabbos. It's mutter on Motzei Shabbos by the Zman of Kidei Sheyeyasu. As far as other people, it's mutter to other Yisraelim completely, even on Shabbos. Why? Because we're dealing with a case where the Ein Yehudi was only performed on Isser D'Rabbanan, and by Isurei D'Rabbanan, we do not extend the Isser to other Yisraelim. It only applies to the Yisrael that it was brought for. That brings us now to the end of the bottom line of Kufton Chesam Nebeis, to the Yesh Oimrim. The Yesh Oimrim, there are those that say, the Lemisha Huva B'Shvilai. There are those that say that even to the one that it was brought for, Mutter la'erev miyad. It becomes mutter immediately on Motzei Shabbos. You don't have to wait ad kidei sheyeyasu. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Eis Katan Membeis. Mutter la'erev miyad. The sphere lahu, because these shitas hold to be Isurei D'Rabbanan ain't sarach lahachmir b'chidei sheyeyasu af lemisha huva b'shviloi. These Mandi Yomrim hold that when it comes to an Isur D'Rabbanan, even the Yisrael that it was brought for does not have to wait for Kedei Sheyeyasu. Uladina yesh lahachmer kisvar rishayna. The Mishnah Berurah says that we should be machmer like the first opinion, that you do have to wait for Kedei Sheyeyasu. He brings this down from the El Yerabah, the Bach, the Marshal. The Kosev Sheked Mashma Mistimis HaShulchan Aruch Kaman Sif Siman Tavkuf Tesvav. The Choshke Betchumin Dishtei Maser Mil. Certainly, when it comes to the Tchum of Yud Beis Mil, the Yesh Oimrim Tehu Da'araisa. Continues the Mechaber top line Kufton Tesam and Aleph. The Had Sharli Yisrael Letaltal. Now, we made the point earlier that over here in this case, where we're not dealing with an Isser of Muktzah, so the item that the Ein Yehudi brought from outside of the Tchum is mutter betiltol to everybody, even to the Yisrael that it was brought for, because there's no reason to say that it's Muktzah, it's a non-Muktzah item. So we're not going to apply Yisurei Muktzah to it. But now the Mechaber points out a very important caveat. When we say that this item is not muktzah and it's mutter for any Yisrael, including the one it was brought for, to be metaltal it, but remember, even if the Ein Yehudi brought the item for himself, it's mutter betiltal, but dafka b'sayich arba amos. But when we say that it's mutter b'tiltal, it doesn't mean that you could pick it up and put it wherever you want. It's only mutter to move it within Dalet Amos of where the Ein Yehudi put it down. Now we'll explain this in a moment, but let's go a little further in the Mechaber. Oy b'sayich ha'ir, or you could move it throughout the entire city, im hi mukefes chayma, if the city is surrounded by a wall, so that the entire city is considered like the Dalet Amos of the package that he brought. V'hu shetei mukefes ledira, but that's only true if the city was what's called mukefes ledira. It's a city that was walled for the purpose of habitation, meaning dahainu sheyashva ulebasayif hukva, meaning that the city came first and then the wall was put up surrounding it. Ustam ayaros mukefes ledira. The default city that you find with a wall, we assume that it was Mukaf Ledira, meaning we could always assume that the city was built up first and then the walls were put up, so it's considered Mukaf Ledira, Ustam Mivtsarim, Ena Mukaf Ledira, but a fortress by default, we assume, was not Mukaf Ledira. Okay, that was quite a mouthful. What are we saying over here? So let me explain to you first quickly outside what the Mechaber is telling you. The Mechaber said in the beginning of Sif Ches, that when an Ein Yehudi brings something from outside of the Tchum, assuming it's a non-muktzah object, and assuming it's not something we have to worry was muktzah during Ben Hashmashas on Friday evening, that item is mutter bitiltel, which means you're allowed to move it. Now, says the Mechaber, yeah, you're allowed to move it, but you're only allowed to move it within Daled Amos. Now, why would that be? It's very simple, because we've mentioned here before that when Shabbos comes in, on Motzei Shabbos, every person, every animal, every object is considered to be kaina shvisa. It acquires a place for the purpose of Hilchos Shabbos, and more specifically, for the purpose of measuring a tchum. So a person who's located in a city, when Shabbos comes in, he's kaina shvisa inside that city. And now he has a tchum Shabbos. What's its tchum Shabbos? 2,000 amas from the city out, from the city limits going out, right? He could travel the entire city, and then he could travel in any direction 2,000 amas beyond the city limits. But once you hit a point 2,000 amas outside of the city limits, that is his Tchum Shabbos. Now that applies to everything. It applies to a bottle of wine also. A bottle of wine that starts off Shabbos in the city, that bottle of wine has a Tchum Shabbos. It's not allowed to be transported outside of its Tchum Shabbos. So if the bottle of wine started Shabbos within the city, that bottle of wine has a Tchum limit. Its Tchum limit is 2,000 amas beyond the city limits. Now, the bottle of wine is not going for a spatzir, it's not going for a walk. So what does it mean that it has a Tchum? Very simple. You're not allowed to pick up that wine bottle and transport it beyond its Tchum Shabbos. Now you'll tell me, well, what's the issue? You have the same Tchum as the wine bottle. That's not necessarily true. Let's say you have somebody who made an Eruv, and now he made an Eruv Tchumen, and that now he has a Tchum that's 4,000 amas beyond the city limit. And this bottle of wine is not his. This bottle of wine, he somehow gets it on Shabbos. That bottle of wine has a Tchum that's 2,000 amas beyond the city limits. His Tchum Shabbos is 4,000 amas beyond the city limits. Is he allowed to take this bottle of wine with him? No, because he's not allowed to transport this bottle of wine outside of its Tchum. So there you see right away a case where it's very practical. We need to know what an object's Tchum is. Now, what happens if an object is transported outside of its Tchum on Shabbos? Well, the halacha of an object that goes outside of its Tchum on Shabbos is the same as the halacha of a person who goes out of his Tchum on Shabbos. If a person travels beyond his Tchum on Shabbos, he's not allowed to go more than 4 amas from wherever he is. Once you go outside of your Tchum, you are restricted to an area of Daled Amas in each direction. So too with an object. If an object goes beyond its Tchum Shabbos, it's not allowed to be moved more than Daled Amas from wherever it is in each direction. So if an Yehudi brought a package from outside the Tchum Shabbos, and he delivers it on Shabbos, this is an object which is now outside of its Tchum. So yes, in the beginning of Sif Ches, we said that you're allowed to be metaltal this object. You're allowed to move it. Yeah, but you're only allowed to move it within 4 square amas of where it's located, because it went outside of its Tchum, and now it's restricted to an area of 4 square amas. That's what the Mechaber said over here. Now, he made another point, and that is that that's only true if you're out in the Sadeh, if you're out in the wild. If you're in a city, so then the city is considered like Daled Amas. So yes, if the Ein Yehudi took an object and brought it outside of its Tchum, but now he brought it into the city, and the city is Mukaf Chaima, the city has a wall around it, so the city is like one big Rishos HaYachid, in that case, the item could move totally within the entire limits of the city, because the entire limits of the city, as long as it remains within the city, that's considered as if it remains within its 4 amas. What is this that the Mechaber is talking about over here, Mukaf L'Dira and not Mukaf L'Dira? That's a subject that we're going to discuss in great detail, Mi'at Hashem, in Chelik Dalid, and that is that we're used to looking at a city that's surrounded by a wall, and we're used to saying, okay, you're allowed to carry in that city because it has a wall around it. That's only true if the city was Mukaf L'Dira. And Mukaf L'Dira means that the city was there first, and then the wall was put up to surround the city. Then the city becomes like a Rishus HaYachid, and you could carry within the city, so long as you have a Ruvi Chatzeris, etc., etc. But if it's not Hukuf Ledira, what does not Hukuf Ledira mean? It means that the wall went up first, and then the city developed inside that space, that it doesn't have that halacha. Let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Cotton Mem Gimel. B'saych arba amas, you're only allowed to move this object within 4 square amas. The chol davar sheyatza chutz l'tchum, anytime an object leaves its tchum, also l'tal l'chutz l'arba amas, you're not allowed to move it outside of 4 square amas of where it is now located. Av shemutar ba'achila b'mkaimon, but you're allowed to eat it right where it is. Im loy be'ir shemukefes b'chitza, unless you're inside a city that's surrounded by a wall, the nechshav kol ha'ir ka'arba amas, because then the entire city within the wall is considered like one area of 4 square amas. Ois cotton memdalid mukefes chayma v'uadin kisheniskan b'tzuras haPesach. The city doesn't have to physically be surrounded by a wall. It could be surrounded with what we colloquially call an eruv, right? You have posts and strings forming a tzuras haPesach, forming the form of a doorway, which we consider to be a mechitza. The chashiv nami kali ir ka'arba amas, that would also make the entire city like 4 square amas. The choshken bayis v'chotzer, certainly if the Eini Yehudi brings this item from outside of the tchum and he deposits it inside the house, you could move it anywhere within the house. The chotzer, or if he brings it outside and deposits it in a walled-in chotzer, the nechshav kol hahekev ka'arba amas, you could move it throughout the chotzer because it's all considered like 1 4 square amas. But it's only true if the city was mukefes ledira. If the city was not surrounded for dira purposes, or the Eini Yehudi deposits this package that he brought from outside of the tchum out in the field in an area that's not surrounded by mechitzas, then that chayfetz, that object, is only allowed to move on Shabbos within 4 square amas. If one person picks it up and moves it 1 amma or 2 amas, if another person wants to pick it up, he's only going to have 3 amas left or 2 amas left. In other words, don't think that what it means is that one person can't move the object more than 4 amas. But if you have a whole group of people, so one person could move it 2 amas, then the next person can move it 2 amas, then the next person can move it another 2 amas. No, the object is restricted to an area of 4 square amas. Doesn't matter how many people try to move it. Aiskat Memvav, the Ramah adds here at the end of the Sif, Ayin Lekaman Siman Taf Aleph Sif Aleph, says the Mishnah Berurah, Hainu Desham Kasav L'chayre Hepech. There seems to be a little bit of a stira between what we're learning over here and what we see in Taf Aleph when it comes to the question of Mukaf Ladira, Avalataz Kfar Yishuv Sham D'Loi Sasri Ayadadi Ayin Sham. That looks like a line and a half of relatively simple Mishnah Berurah. It is not at all. If you look at the Taz over there, there's a lot of kashas on this, but that is beyond the scope of what we do here in this shir. Moving along to Sif Tes, 4 lines off the top of Kuftan Tes Amin Aleph, says the Mechaber. If an Eini Yehudi brings an object, and we don't know if it came from outside of the Tchum, we have a suffix whether it came from outside of the Tchum or not. Aser, we apply all of the Yisurim that we've been learning until here. So we have to assume that the object did come from outside of the Tchum. If it came from Yisrael, for the purposes of a Yisrael, it was delivered for a Yid. It's going to be Aser to that Yid Ba'achila on Shabbos, and we'll have a machlokes what its din is on Motzei Shabbos. But that's only true if the Eini Yehudi who delivered the object doesn't live in your city. But if Tony brings you the object, and you know that Tony lives in your city, so then why should you assume that he brought it from outside of the Tchum? He lives in the city with you. He lives within your Tchum. Why do you have a suffix if he brought it from outside the Tchum? So if Tony lives in the city, and Tony brought apples, and we know that there are apples in the city, then then we don't have to be concerned. Then you essentially don't have a suffix. Even if Tony has 2 cities, one is located inside the Tchum, and one is located outside of the Tchum. Still, you don't have to worry. Toilin lahakal, we could assume, we could go lakula, and we could assume that Tony brought it from his house that's located within the tchum. Mutter lechayel, and it's mutter ba'achila, afilu lemisha huva b'shvilai, even to the Israel that Tony brought it for. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Kadmem Zayin imhu safik. Says the Mishnah Berurah, V'afta sveika de Rabbanu Lakula, in the first halach of Siftes, the Mechaber tells me if you really have a suffix that the item was brought from outside of the Tchum, the guy who brought it lives outside the Tchum, so you really have a suffix. If it came from outside of the Tchum, the Mechaber said you have to be machmir, and you have to assume that it came from outside of the Tchum, and it's aser. Says the Mishnah Berurah, wait a second. V'afta sveika de Rabbanu Lakula, usually we say suffix de Rabbanu Lakula, and this is Isser Tchumin, it's a de Rabbanon. So why don't we say suffix Rabbanu Lakula? Answers the Chavetz Chaim, something we've seen already several times. Also, bazeh mishum dehevet davar sheyesh lo matirin de'ef shelahamtin ad erev Shabbos v'chanal. The Ramban in the Melchamis and the Magid Mishnah v'chein netikva achreinim, they all say the same thing. Even though theoretically we could apply the rule of suffix Rabbanu Lakula, we're not going to apply that kula over here because we're dealing with the davar sheyesh lo matirin. Whatever the Ein Yehudi brought, it will automatically become mutter on Motzei Shabbos. So wait till Motzei Shabbos and use it then. Ois Katan Memches, Aser, Sasam Bazeh Kedasa Ga'onim. The Mechaber over here is taking the position of the Ga'onim, the Oisrin Besafik, that Taka go l'chumra and say that when you have a suffix, you have to be machber. V'chein Sasam Besif Tezayin. Udaloi Kedasa Matirin Hamuva Beveis Yosef. This is unlike the Shita that the Beis Yosef brings that is more makel. We came up against this already 2 shiurim ago in Siv Zayin, where we saw a Yesh Oimrim that is more makel and says that by a suffix you don't have to be machber. V'hinei after l'daitam af b'motzei Shabbos aser b'zeh b'chtei sheyaseh b'kamakim iskimo achreinim delinyan Motzei Shabbos ein lahachmer b'zeh. We don't have to be machmer on Motzei Shabbos. In Sivches we saw Yesh Oimrim that says that even when you know for certain that something was brought from outside of the Tchum, you don't have to be machmer and wait for Kadesha Yeyasa and Motzei Shabbos. So therefore, Al-Kain, B'Safik Al-Kapan, Yesh Lis B'Chal Matirin, certainly by a suffix we do not have to be machmer. Oiskat Meim Tes, Ein Lachush Mi Safik. In a case where you know that the Ein Yehudi lives within your Tchum, and you know that the object he brought is something that he could get within the Tchum, so then Ein Lachush B'Safik. Then we don't have to be machmer Misafik. Sha'aperisa Eilu Havian Chutz Tchum. If we know that the guy lives within the Tchum, and we know that he could have gotten these apples within the Tchum, then we don't have to be machmer and be choshesh that maybe he brought it from outside the Tchum. The Adarabba, Darwina Kam Nimtzu, Kanoyu. Adarabba. Really, the laws really of Chazaka would tell you the opposite. They would say the item is here. So if the item is here, we should assume it was always here. Why are we assuming it came from outside of the Tchum? Ois Katan Nun. Even if the Ein Yehudi has 2 houses, one within the Tchum and one outside of the Tchum, we could assume it came from within the Tchum. Even though now there's a more reasonable concern because the Ein Yehudi does own a house outside of the Tchum, mikamakam talinam lahakel, we still go lekula. The adkan lo yasvir misafik elab Ein Yehudi she'en lo dira klal b'seichat Tchum. We're only going to be machmer on a suffix if the Ein Yehudi Pashut doesn't have a house inside the Tchum. So there's a very strong reason to say he brought it from outside the Tchum. So then Chayshin and Deshem Chutz Tchum Eviyah B'Shabbos. Aval Bazeh Sheish LeBayis B'Seichat Tchum. But when the Ein Yehudi has a house inside the limits of the Tchum, Lo Misafkina Klal Shem Eviyah Michutz. We're not going to entertain a suffix that he brought it from outside of the Tchum. Darbrina Kan Nimtzu Kan Hayu Hainu Babayis B'Seichat Tchum. Moving along to Sif Yud, 4 lines off the bottom of the Amud, says the Mechaber. Ein Yehudi shemile mayim lebehemtoi. You have an Ein Yehudi who drew water to give to his animal to drink. Okay, so there's a well. Now the inside of the well is a rishus hayachid. It's big enough to be its own rishus hayachid. The inside of the well. The area outside the well, up on the surface, is in the rishus harabim. So when you take a bucket and you lower it into the well, You're lowering a bucket into the Rishus HaYachid, you fill it up with water, you draw the bucket up to the top, and then you take it out into Rishus HaRabim. That would be an Issa Daraisa. You just transferred a bucket of water from inside the well, which is a Rishus HaYachid, to up on the surface outside of the well, where it's a Rishus HaRabim. So now let's say an Ein Yehudi did this, and he did it for himself. He did it in order to give his animals water to drink. So Ein Yehudi, Shemile Mayim LeBehemtoi, an Ein Yehudi filled up a bucket with water for his own animal, Mi Barshu Rishus HaYachid, from within a well, where the interior of the well is a Rishus HaYachid, L'Rishus HaRabim, and he transferred the water up to the surface outside of the well, which is a Rishus HaRabim. So, okay, what do we have over here? We have an Ein Yehudi performed Malacha Daraisa. He performed the Isser of Haitzah. He transferred water from Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabim, but he did it for himself. He did it to give it to his own animals. Okay, says the Mechaber, Mutter li Yisrael lahashkes mehem behemtoi. A Yisrael is allowed to now use that water and give that water to his animals to drink. Okay, so again, the Ein Yehudi did an Issa Daraisa, but the Ein Yehudi did an Issa Daraisa completely for his own purposes. He did it for himself. Now, there's no Isser of Muktzah over here. The water is not Muktzah. The only problem over here is that the Ein Yehudi did Malacha Daraisa, but he did it for himself. Says the Mechaber, you could go enjoy the use of that water, you could give it to your animals. But, caveat, for who, she'eino Ein Yehudi makiroi. But it has to be a case where the Ein Yehudi who drew up the water doesn't know you. And therefore there's no concern that maybe, even though the guy is saying that he did it for himself, yeah, he did it for himself, but he knows that you also need water. For himself, he might have only taken a half a bucket of water. Now that he knows that you need water, he took a full bucket of water. So in that case, he did malacha for you. Continues the Mechaber, and if the guy mamish did the malacha for the Yid, if the guy filled up the bucket for the Yid's water, aser b'chol mine tashmish, that water is aser for any use at all. You can't give it to the animals to drink, you can't wash your hands with it. Afilu Yisrael acher. And not only is it aser to the Yid that he did it for, it's aser to any Yisrael. Says the Bishwar's Katan Aleph, She'ein Ein Yehudi Makiroi. If the Ein Yehudi who hauled up this bucket of water knows the Yid, Avsha Ein Yehudi Asal Atzmai, then even if the guy says that he did it for himself, Aser, it's still Aser, the Gazru, because we're going to make a Gzera, Shem Yarba Ein Yehudi L'Dleis B'Shvilai. Because if we're going to allow this to happen, then the next time the Ein Yehudi might fill up extra water for the Yisrael. This is also even if it wasn't done in front of the Yid. But in order for it to be aser, it's only going to be aser if the guy at least knows that the Yisrael needs the water. Because then it's reasonable to say that when Tony loaded up the water, he put in extra for the Yid. But if the Ein Yehudi brought up the water for Yisrael, then it's also b'chol minei tashbish, then you're not allowed to use that water for anything. Hainu d'lo mebayil l'shtia, certainly it's also for drinking. The ikra yomer l'kach bevadei aser. The main purpose of the water was for drink, whether for the animals or for people. For that purpose, it's certainly aser. But it's also aser to use the water for anything else. Ice cotton and gimel, and it's also afilu Yisrael acher, even for other Yisraelim. The kevin the isavid b'hu malacha da'araisa b'shvil Yisrael. This is the important Mishnah Berurah over here. Since in this case the guy did malacha da'araisa, he did the malacha of haitzah, which is a malacha da'araisa, and he did it b'shvil Yisrael. Aser l'kol Yisrael. It's also for everybody. V'chanal b'sivav. And it would be also on Masi Shabbos until the Zman of Kedei Sheyeh Yoseh. So far what we see over here in Sif Yud, you have an Ein Yehudi did something, he did malacha, which would be an Isser Daraisa. He did the Isser of Haitzah. He transferred water from the inside of the well, which is a Rishus HaYachid, to up on the surface outside of the confines of the well, which is a Rishus HaRabim, that is Malacha Da'araisa. The Eini Yehudi did Malacha Da'araisa. If he did it for himself, then the water is mutter. But if he did it for a Yisrael, then the Malacha is going to be, again, if he did it for himself, it's going to be mutter. If he did it for himself, then any Yid could go ahead and enjoy that water. But if he did it for a Yid, then that water is going to be usher to everybody. Now, some people might be wondering, earlier on in this Siman in Sif Dalet, we spoke about an Eini Yehudi who baked bread for himself. So that's also an Eini Yehudi who did Malacha Daraisa for himself. And over there, we said that there's a Yesh Matirim. Why is there a Yesh Matirim over there? And why is there a Yesh Eisrim? I'm sorry, over there in Sif Dalet, we said there's a Yesh Eisrim. Over there, there's a more machmer opinion that says that when an Eini Yehudi does Malacha Daraisa for himself, a Yisrael is not allowed to enjoy the fruits of that Malacha. And over here, we're talking about a guy who did the Malacha of Hitzah, which is also an Issa Daraisa, and over here we don't have a Yesh Eisrim. The answer is, we saw this in the Mishnah Berurah earlier in Sif Dalet, and that is that by Midi da Achila, when we're dealing with things that have to do with food, we're more machmer, because people have a big taiva for food. Over here, we're not really dealing with food. We're dealing with water that the animals are going to drink. Over here, we don't have a Yesh Eisrim. Okay, we're going to stop over here. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. This is limud HaTorah. Should be made in God's Klal Yisrael. The Baruch Hashem should send Yeshua's first parashat should do come to those need. We should be zeicher to see the Bias Gal Tzedek b'mherav Yameinu. Amen. Be well.